hello and welcome again to the Women on Board's 20 Years of WOB podcast with me, Claire Braund, co-founder and executive director of WOB. Today we're talking to Toni Brendish, whom WOB first met when she was the managing director of Nutricia for Australia and New Zealand. Nutricia was a Dutch infant formula business which went on to be acquired by the global group Danone. With a long career history in FMCG, that would be fast-moving consumer goods, and food manufacturing across Europe, Asia, New Zealand and Australia, it seemed fitting when Toni took her first non-executive role with Clover Corporation in 2020. She has since gone on to build an impressive NED career. Well, hello and welcome, Toni.
Thanks, Claire, but we're feeling a bit old when we start to talk about 20 years, isn't it?
You're absolutely right, but I'm going to take you back even further to your childhood because your father was a flight service officer and you spent childhood years in remote locations such as Papua, New Guinea and Port Hedland during the 1960s and 70s. Can you tell us a bit about your early years and any impacts that these had on your subsequent career choices?
Sure, I can. So yes, my father was a flight service officer and went on to become an instructor. So I think many of those years we moved from various places, as you say, Port Hedland and Derby and Broome, and then eventually to Papua New Guinea. And as a child, you're having to meet people over and over again. And so you kind of have to make friends quite quickly or find a way to sort of connect with people. And I think that definitely helped me a lot. I think the other thing about living in Papua New Guinea, and this probably seems crazy now when you think about how we're able to stay connected with people over long distance. But if we go back to the 70s, as a 11-year-old, I would be put on a plane in Port Moresby, have to get to Brisbane, and then get myself from Brisbane to Southport to the boarding school where I went, and then do that back again. So I think it gave me a sense of independence and confidence that I've been able to take with me, as I've sort of grown over the years.
Thank you. I think those of us that went to boarding school, they certainly teach you resilience, if nothing else. I think sometimes.
Yeah, teach you resilience. And also I think, for me, it was so precious, some of those friendships that I still have to this day, those connections you make with those people who become your sisters, if you like, in a boarding school. So, no, for me, it was a great experience.
Yeah, no. I concur. You graduated from University of Melbourne with a degree in commerce and then you built a career spanning the big FMC giants like Danone, Coca-Cola, Colgate-Palmolive and Kimberly-Clark across Asia, Australia and New Zealand. What drew you to the sector and did you ever think it would lead to the boardroom?
So it was by accident, not by design. I know that even as a young schoolgirl, I knew that I wanted to be in business, but more importantly, I just wanted to be the boss, because I was the oldest and very bossy and very independent by that stage. And I wanted to work in a business. But at that point, I didn't really understand what fast-moving consumer goods were. And I had, at my university, as we were getting to the end of the degree, started to sort of look around and think, where can I go? And I just happened to go to this interview for Unilever and got accepted as a graduate trainee, and that was the start of it. So I'd like to say it was well planned, but no, it was really by accident. But it was something that I loved. And I think I had that fantastic start at Unilever where, you really are trained very well in the skills that you need for fast-moving consumer goods. And being in an area where it was so contemporary too, you're living and breathing it because you're seeing it in the grocery stores every day. You're seeing your friends consume the product. I liked that. I really liked to be able to touch and see and feel what I was involved in. Did it lead to the boardroom? Did I think that it was going to lead to the boardroom? Not until many years later. I think I really started to think about my second career quite some years later, as I was pursuing my fast-moving consumer goods career.
You spent 11 years at Danone working across multiple regions and divisions as the managing director. You clearly loved the company because you were there for a long time, working in Asia and the role. What were some of the highlights and why?
Right, so there were many highlights, and it's interesting how some of those challenges at the time don't feel like highlights, but you look back on them and they turn out to be that way. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about working at Danone was the social mission. So to do good whilst you're making products, whilst you're making profit. And I think that's where the sort of values for me personally were aligned with the organisation. And I found that much easier to deal with than in other companies that I'd sort of had experience with. And having those values, the intrinsic values that I could then apply in the different businesses that I worked with. So I think that the highlights, certainly the start in terms of Australia, New Zealand, when I first joined that business, it was still owned by Nutricia. And my brief was fix it or sell it. So, it was in a dire strait. And being able to fix it and turn that business into a really successful, profitable company was a major highlight. But I think more importantly was the team that we built and how we were able to sort of have that success continue and not be just a one-off. And then moving to Asia really was fantastic. It was an amazing experience. And in the beginning, I wasn't really that keen to go because I had already done that kind of expatriate life as a single person living in London and enjoying a great life. And we had 2 young children, but it was my husband who said to me, this is just an amazing opportunity for us as a family to kind of get out there and give our kids a different world to the bubble that we lived in, living in Sydney and living in the lower North Shore and all of those things. And that really was fantastic. So it was a great working environment and huge challenges in terms of what needed to happen with the business. But from a family perspective, being able to live in that environment and expose our children to different cultures and, different socio-economic issues that were facing different countries and help them see that, I think has, certainly broadened their minds in terms of the way they think about things, but also, just open their eyes to be really, I think, fantastic people in terms of